Hey, educators, and welcome back to the season finale of PD for the Soul. Before we dive into today's powerful interview with James Oneal, I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you to every guest who brought their brilliance, experience, and heart to the mic this season. And thank you, listener, for showing up episode after episode, hungry to grow, not just for yourself, but for your students. Whether you listen on your commute, during planning time, or in those quiet moments after the school day, your presence has meant everything. And now, guess what? You made it. No matter what the data says, no matter how messy the year may have felt, you crossed the finish line. That alone is worth celebrating. As we close out season 1, I want to remind you to grab the free PD for the Soul podcast companion journal. It's a place to reflect on what you've learned, how you've grown, and how you want to re-enter the next season, because that's what season 2 is all about. Reflect, reset, re-engage. We're back on June 1st, and I promise you we're coming in strong with a month focused on restoration, reflection, and getting fully prepared for what's next. Until then, take care of you. Rest well. You've earned it. Let's wrap this season with joy and jump into our final episode, Unlocking Potential, the Power of High Expectations in the Math Classroom with the James Oneal. Welcome to today's episode of PD for the Soul, where we're focusing on unlocking potential, the power of high expectations in math. We've all heard the phrase, students will rise to the level of our expectations, but what does that really mean in a math classroom? Too often, we unintentionally lower the bar, assuming students aren't ready for rigorous math because of past struggles. But when we shift our mindset, set clear and high expectations, and provide the right support, we unlock potential that might have otherwise gone unseen. In this episode, we're digging into what it looks like to truly hold high expectations in math, not just in what we teach, but in how we teach it. How do we challenge students to think deeply rather than just get the right answer? How do we ensure that every student has access to grade level content, even when they come in below grade level? And most importantly, how do we create a classroom culture where struggle is embraced as a part of learning, not a sign of failure? I am excited to welcome the James Oneal. Please give the people a taste of who you are.
First of all, super excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ms. Boone. I am James Oneal, founder of Mastery for All, where we support the mastery of mathematics teaching by providing professional development, coaching, and consulting in this space, K-12 mathematics. And in my business, I highlight the brilliance of all by centering the brilliance of Black boys, because I do not believe we can say all and they are not a part of that equation. Also a speaker as well, speaking all things math, speaking all things equity, speaking all things as it relates to mastery and what it takes to master mathematics and just be a mastery teacher. And a lot of my work deals with mindset because that's where it starts. So I'm excited to be with you today and excited to talk about math because that's one of my passions.
I'm super excited myself. I came across you through a mutual friend that we have. I think you guys were in some type of cohort together, and he mentioned it because you were in math, and he know that is a passion of mine. Then I went and did a deep dive on your website, looked at the videos that you made available for the public there, and then I had the pleasure to see you live at Hive last year, which was amazing. So my first question for you is, what inspired you to establish Mastery for All, and how does it aim to support students and educators?
Yeah, so the reason why I started Mastery for All, because I realized that a lot of our students were not mastering mathematics. And it wasn't just what they were doing, it was what I realized is that a lot of teachers were not teaching in an expectation that students could master mathematics. I think some things that I've come across since I've been out of the classroom and visiting buildings and supporting districts as it relates to mathematics is the idea that, and I know we're going to get into this, but I'm probably going to repeat it over and over and over again. Everything starts with your belief. And so your belief will dictate what kids will do, who you will talk to, what curriculum you use, what part of the curriculum you don't do, what problems you assign, which problems you don't assign, who you engage with, how engaging the class is, whether kids are talking, whether they're not talking. That all starts and it filters through what you expect and what a lot of times you may be comfortable with. So Mastery for All was really birthed out of this idea that says, I am not an anomaly as it relates to students doing well in mathematics. I think that there's some things, some coaching that needs to be done. There's some consulting that needs to be done. There's some professional development, some work mindset work, some skill sets that need to be developed in some teachers in order for them to see the results that they ultimately want to see. And because I'm tired of hearing that that old excuse, well, they don't have this and they don't have that. I mean, a lot of us have the same slate of kids, but some of us are getting results and some of us are not. So I want us to get results because our kids, our futures are at stake.
Absolutely. I support several teachers in my role as a district math coach. And I have conversations with my teachers, and something that they say that is really common, and I think you mentioned it just now, is they can't dot 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 dot. These kids dot 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 dot. And it's really a reflection of the expectations and the thoughts and opinions that they have surrounding the students that they are supporting, which is really sad because we know how beneficial it is for teachers to have those high expectations because students, generally speaking, are going to rise to the occasion, right? So
Yes.
I want you to elaborate on what you feel like is the relationship between those high expectations, those equitable outcomes, and then that student mastery.
I'll share this part of my personal story with expectations. I was in a standard math class in eighth grade. I wasn't labeled gifted. I'm from a very small town in North Carolina called Belhaven, North Carolina. We had about 2,000 people in our entire city. So my graduating class at the time was like 100 or less. A teacher in eighth grade, the AIG or the exceptional teacher, or some people say the gifted teacher at the time was gifted, looked at me and one of my best friends, a best friend at the time, Chester, two black boys, and she said, "Hey, I'm gonna give you this placement test. I've seen your grades in math have been A's, and I'm gonna give you this placement test to get in Algebra 1." She gave me that test. That test got me into Algebra 1. Algebra 1, that track changed my life. Ultimately, it was the very first time, and I always share this story as much as I can, where a teacher's expectations of me changed. I had been getting the same grades that the gifted kids had been getting, but no one said, "Hey, I think you might be in the wrong track. Let's move you to the other track." And so she literally had the power, because expectations, we really think that, there's this narrative out here that teachers don't have power and all this, whatever, like that. But we literally are gatekeepers, and no matter what subject we had, she literally had the power to give me a test to have me qualify. Now, should she not have that expectation of me, she would have never gave me that test. So that literally speaks to a track that I either had time to get on or not. And I was in a small little town, and so the gifted kids were on a track that nobody else was on. Because they had took these classes beforehand, when we got to high school, there was no doubling up or anything like that. You only taught Algebra 1 or honors geometry one period through the day, and it was offered at one time because we're a little small school. We don't have like that many sections. And so her expectations of me put me into a class that I literally qualified for before that, but then also exposed me to AP and honors classes and raised my GPA. And so when I think about expectations, when I think about high and how they relate to equitable outcomes, look, I am an outcome of a teacher's decision of my life. Like I'm the outcome that I got was that, oh, I get to take honors classes. Oh, I get to take AP classes. Oh, the very next class I get to take is geometry honors. Oh, I just got a college credit. Well, not a college credit, but a high school credit in middle school. Oh, now I get to open up my schedule to take college courses and get credit. You talking about equitable outcomes? I didn't have that outcome until that teacher had that expectation from me. So those things are heavily tied together, which ultimately leads to mastery. Yes, I was doing well on my level, but I needed a challenge to actually stretch myself to a new space. So yeah, I'm passionate about that because I know what expectations do and how they change our lives.
That's such a powerful story. And I'm glad that you can share that from personal experience because a lot of times people are talking about things that they believe, but you actually walked it. That is your lived experience. And I think people can get a lot from that. So, thinking about educators and how can they cultivate a classroom environment where their students believe in their potential to be successful?
That's a really good question, Lanisha. That's a really, really good question. When I think about how can educators cultivate a classroom environment where every student believes in their potential, educators have to start at what do they believe? And I think we need to ask ourselves that first. What do we believe about our kids? Because whatever we believe, we will cultivate. And sometimes we're asking, how can we cultivate when we never ask people, what do you believe? Because when I started believing that my students can, I started shifting how much I gave them. For instance, I grew up in a time in math classes where it was the I do, we do, you do. It means everything started with the teacher. Everything started with the teacher. And so the mindset was is that as long as I mimic him or her, I'm gonna be good. I can copy down the equations, I can solve, give me the formula, I can plug it in. Lanisha, the hardest class I had in high school was that geometry class. I struggled in geometry. And the reason why I struggled in geometry was because this was the first time people were like, now you make sense of it on your own. I was like, what? Y'all believe that I can write a proof after never really kind of like thinking through some of the mathematics because it was always given to me from the teacher. And so, in order to cultivate a classroom where students believe, we have to ultimately believe that our students can. And from that belief, discourse is going to happen, right? We're going to allow students to have the ability to talk about their thinking, talk about the mathematics, being able to have a culture in which it's okay to be wrong and it's stated and we make mistakes and we learn from our mistakes in the classroom. When you believe, you don't run away from the grade level content. You find a way to scaffold in what students need, get that quick on ramp, that bridge, if you will, so that they can practice the skill that they have, but they need a refresher on, right? When you start to believe in students, you don't gatekeep what the grade level work is. You continually build upon the things that are necessary to get students where you believe that they can go. And so in order to ultimately what I believe is cultivate this belief, cultivate a classroom where students start believing that they can, you have to start believing. Your language will change. How your patience with kids will change. Your demeanor when they make a mistake or when they don't get it, your whole energy starts to shift, and students literally start believing like, I can do this. I may have messed up, right? Your encouragement to them changes. Like the amount of times you reach out. I mean, every way, which way you move will change when you start believing students can, and that cultivation ultimately starts from there.
So I'm reminded as you wrapped up just now, just how deep the mind work is. Because in order for me to create that environment, like you said, I have to believe it myself. And I think there's so many biases that we have in the classroom. I think that kind of stands in the way and creates those barriers from having those high expectations because you believe that certain students can or cannot. And again, it's stopping us from creating that environment because we don't believe it ourselves. So we can't get you, the student, to believe it.
Yep.
So it's very interesting. So what are some practical approaches that teachers can adopt to set and also maintain high expectations for all students?
So, some practical approaches, once that belief is set in stone, practical approaches, and this is what I teach teachers, what makes specifically math teachers, but I can apply to all teachers, good to great, is the anticipation of errors and then the actual scaffolding and planning to get students over those errors. I'm literally reminded of when I got my last student teacher, and we were teaching. We was in a section of parallel lines cut by a transversal. And we weren't even talking about like the actual relationships and the name or the alternate interior angles and all the different relationships. It was just seeing which angles are congruent. It's not a hard understanding. Literally, you have two parallel lines cut by transversals, and I was teaching my student teacher that many times I allow kids to see the relationship with, if they're not perpendicular lines, between the acute and obtuse angles. And they come to the realization like, oh, all the acute angles are equal, all the obtuse angles are equal, and those two angles always add up to 180. Well, she was teaching this and she was having a hard time just getting across to the kids. She was like, the kids, I don't know, this is not hard, and they can't remember it. And I said to her, what are they not getting? And I think the practical approach to that question, I don't think a lot of teachers take that practical approach. What we end up doing is reteaching everything. Like you don't understand parallel lines, so I'm gonna go, this is a parallel line, this is a transversal, this is the angle here. No, ask yourself, what are they getting stuck on? And in that practical approach, we realized the kids did not remember what an acute angle was. So when you're asking them to find acute angles, they don't know what to look for. They're just like, I don't know. And that's why they're getting it wrong. Once she diagnosed that problem, she realized like, oh, everybody pretty much in the class starting to get it right. And so when I think about like practical approaches, I think we we make this harder than it is because we're frustrated. Because it's just like, what are y'all not getting? That's the question. What are they not getting? And so the practical approach that I always teach teachers is, what is the thing that they're missing? And now plan around that. What is the thing? What is the barrier that you believe students will have? And now plan around that. Because we can look at kids and be like, they don't know their timetables. They don't need to know their timetables to plot a point today. That's that deficit mindset. They need to know the X and Y axis. X comes before Y. That's an anticipation of a barrier. What are you going to do about that barrier? How are you going to remind kids about making sure the X comes before the Y? Those are the practical things that I think that we forget, because we forget that we're surgeons. We're not generalists. We literally have to diagnose the problem in order to actually address it. And just those practical questions is a way that I believe that I've ultimately used help teachers to actually help at the areas that they need to help, as opposed to seeing kids as a deficit, as to all the things they don't know or they can't remember. But what is the main thing today? Keep the main thing the main thing.
100%. So, one thing that I like to do on the podcast is, if a guest says something that triggers me to think about one of those influences that is listed on John Hattie's influences that impact student outcomes, I have to Google it. I have to pull it up because I have to see what that effect size is. So you've been talking a lot about planning and anticipation student responses, and then preparing for that, and being prepared to provide those scaffolds so that we can get students to reach that goal. So I go to John Hattie's 252 plus influences, and right here under teaching, focus on teaching and instructional strategies, we have planning and prediction. This one has an effect size of 76 hundredths. So the listeners know that our hinge point is at 4/10 or 40 hundredths, right? So at 4/10, that's where what we're doing can grow a student 1 year. Anything beyond that accelerates those student outcomes. So if we're talking about planning and prediction being 76 hundredths, we are almost doubling that hinge point, almost doubling it. So planning is so important. And in a previous episode, I brought up how important planning was. The guest did as well, because I share that there's a part of TikTok where teachers don't want to plan. They feel like they don't want to plan. And the guest shared that she thinks that the teachers who say that are really bucking at the idea of filling out the form. But my concern is not with the form. It's more so what you're stating is, we have to know how to address those needs of our students. What are you going to do? What questions are you going to ask? How are you going to provide those supports in the moment? And we may feel like we can think on our feet, on our toes, because we might have been doing it for so long. But how much better and more comfortable would you feel if you have a plan?
Mm.
That's my thought process. But I
Your
digress.
thought process is my thought process.
So we vibing. Okay.
We are here.
So, in what ways can teachers address and overcome some of those systemic barriers to ensure that we have those equitable learning opportunities?
Yeah, this is another really good question. Um, when I think about some of the ways they can address to overcome these barriers is through reflection. Another thing that I will say makes a good teacher a great teacher, a bad teacher a better teacher, wherever we're starting off at different levels, is your use of reflection. So, if we're going to address or overcome systemic barriers, that we have to know what the barriers are. And we have to know what we necessarily believe. I remember recording myself and I was like, ooh, I come off a little harsher than I thought. Like I was just like, this is a little eye-opener experience. I'm passionate, but I think my passion might be a little harsh some days. And so like I had to realize that I need to soften a little bit. And I didn't know I was coming across like that. So until I knew that, I knew to correct it. I think professional development around these things are important. My business totes the fact that I support Black boys. And there was a time in my professional career, I just like to keep it 100, that the most disciplined student in my class were Black boys. And so I was just like at a PD one day, and they said that your academic consequences should not bleed into your behavioral consequences. And what they said was that if a child is taking a test and they're talking during their test, you should not punish them academically for that. There needs to be a behavioral consequence. Because what I grew up seeing is you talk, you're taking off points. You talk, you're taking off points. And so I literally, when I looked at the data of the kids who technically couldn't stay still after the test or needed something to do because they're like boys are wired differently, and specifically my boys that I taught in the community that I taught in just needed, they're not going to, who wants to just sit here, sit here, sit here forever. Like you need to have a plan of what to do afterwards. Like I realized that the most disciplined or punished person in my classroom were my Black boys. And so, like, here I am talking about I'm pro Black boy joy, and then I'm punishing them more out of quote unquote loving them harder. I wouldn't have known that if I wasn't exposed to that. So professional development around that was key for me. And when I heard that, I was in my feelings for a moment because sometimes it's hard to hear the truth and realize that you're in a system and you thought that you were breaking up the system and now you realize there's parts of you complicit to a system of oppression for the very ones that you're trying to get out. And it takes a real one to realize like, hey, I know I said I'm about it, but I need growth in this area. I need to accept it. I need to learn better, do better, and move on. Right. And so I don't think we can effectively address stuff without being exposed to it. And exposure means look at what you're doing, reflect on what you're doing. Those professional, I guess, those walkthroughs that many times your administrator can or cannot get into the room, like when they do get into the room and they do give you reflection, like literally reflect on what they're saying so that you can see the blind spots. And Lanisha, the one of the things that was a game changer for me is ask your kids. I literally started doing surveys, anonymous surveys. Now, I had to build up my skin because I taught middle school, right? I taught eighth grade. And them jokers gonna be honest with you, or not. And I ask questions like rate the level of teaching in my class from 1 to 10. If I just took a kid's phone that day, they give me a 1 or a 2. I don't care what they feel like. That might be a 7 in their heart, right? But today I'm a 1 or a 2 because they petty, right? And so I literally ask questions like that. I'll ask questions like, do you feel like I treat all kids fairly? Like they will tell you the truth. Nah, you tend to call on Lanisha more than you call on anybody. Or when she gets it wrong, you don't really say nothing. Or Jacob in the corner, we can tell you don't like him. He gets on your nerves because every time he raised his hand, you got an attitude. Like they will tell you, and you might be thinking you hiding stuff and might think like Jacob is so annoying. That's what what we're thinking in our head. And I'm trying not to make sure it ooze out of me, but they see the oozing and they're going to comment it. You don't know until you ask. And so I literally tell teachers all the time that, hey, your greatest client is the one you serve every day, and your greatest feedback should probably come from the people that you're serving. So ask them about the environment that they learn in, whether they feel like you're fair, do they feel like you care about them. When I started asking those questions, I started realizing that there were some things that I was doing that was working, and there were some things that I were doing that were not working. And so that's again was another way for me to see the blind spots because you can't see them by yourself.
That's powerful. So a couple of things that I wrote down was the reflection and how key that is, and then the videoing. I think that is so important. In some of my schools, we have the swivel where you can connect it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like a microphone, and then it follows you around the room. They dusty. They haven't been used. We need to break them out the box because I feel like they are an amazing tool to help teachers look at what is actually happening in the classroom. Something that I've been telling my colleagues is I think teachers go into classrooms with good intentions. So I intend to teach X, Y, and Z. I intend to have this type of relationship. I intend to say things in this way. Unfortunately, in the heat of the moment, those intentions don't always show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think videoing yourself so that you can see what really happened versus what you meant to happen but actually didn't, I think it makes it really real. So I'm glad that you brought that up because that is a reminder to myself that we got to dust those swivels off
Dust
so
them
that the
off.
teachers can see themselves. The surveys are so powerful. So I have another colleague, our mutual friend, our connection, who also does the surveys as well. I think that is a really cool way. And like you said, when you're dealing with middle schoolers, you really do have to have thick skin because they'll tell you anything. They'll be
Mm-hmm.
super honest with you. But I think that is, again, for the teachers that are listening, this is something that I want you guys to be vulnerable and try this because you never know what you could learn from those students who are in your classroom. Now, I want to think a little bit about
Can I interrupt
collaboration.
real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say with the surveys, the question that I just said may be too much. It made you just start somewhere because usually when I share this in some of the PDs that I do, my teachers would be like, I ain't about to ask them questions, and then people would literally come up to me, in a nice way, be like, "What if you're not ready?" Or administration will come up and be like, "I don't think my teacher's ready to hear all of that, James." Then start somewhere. Just ask them, "What do you feel about this environment?" Right? Or at the end of the lesson, what worked well for you in today's lesson? What didn't work well for you? Just start somewhere, and as you build up your skin to hear more truth, then build that thing out. And I just wanted to say that.
Now, do you have any, this is random, but do you have any, I guess you can say, a list of questions that are kind of like gradient or progressive, since this is something that you've always done? So, like a start here, if you're just getting started with surveying, here's a set of questions you can kind of select from. Then, once you get ready, here's some other questions. You have a list like that that might be available for our listeners.
I do not yet, but I'm glad you said that because I'm going to make one now.
Thank you.
Definitely going to make one.
Awesome. So, how can educators engage parents? Because we know that this is a common struggle where we're trying to meet goals within the classroom. And sometimes we want to lean on those committed communities, but sometimes the communities aren't as committed as we want them to be. So, how can educators engage those parents and communities to support the goal of mastery for all students?
I knew the greatest advocate that I had was, or I would say not advocate, but the greatest, I say partner because that's what I call parents. I literally call my parents partners, and I knew the person that wanted that child to succeed more than me was that parent. So that was my mindset. I am not about to do life in this classroom without making that connection home because my teaching, this is how I viewed it, was an extension, hopefully was an extension of a parent's goodwill or well wishes for their child, meaning that a parent released their child to go to school, hopefully to be received by someone who cared about that child and wanted to see that child successful. More than I wanted to see that child successful and harping on them to do and to be who I believe they were at their potential, was the person that birthed them, that brought them into the world. And when I took on that mindset, it took me out of the barrier of the fear of engaging parents. I call them partners for a reason. I use that language for a reason because I said I'm coming alongside to help support the raising of this beautiful individual. So when I shifted that mindset, guess what happened? I got a whole bunch of ideas to engage with them. And I'll say this, the barrier for many of us, teachers are some of the most creative people on the face of the earth. Look how much we do many times with the very little we have. We're super creative. Come into our classrooms and everything. I mean, we're just creative in general. And so it's many of us, it's like, I don't know what to do. Sometimes it's just like, I don't know what to do because my mindset won't let me lean into the very next thing that I should be doing. And that's what we're really saying. So to circle back to your question, what did I do, started doing to connect with parents? All of a sudden, I got this idea for a newsletter. I never had an idea for a newsletter before in my life. And what made my newsletter different was that I put questions in my newsletter so that parents could ask their child, gave them the answer, and then I gave maybe on the last question, I gave a extra credit question. And so what I did with the extra credit question, I said, hey, parent, respond with the answer that your child says concerning what we did in class today. What did that start doing? Parents literally started having conversations with their child. First of all, to be like, let's go and ask these questions. Mr. O'Neill said that ain't what it is, right? I got the answer right here. He says this answer. So they're literally having conversation about what we're doing in math class. But at the very end, the engagement piece was that I'm expected to respond to this email with what my child said. So I sent out reminders throughout the week, be like, don't forget about your extra credit. I sent it around 7 o'clock because I knew about that time people were settled, they were home, and all of a sudden I started getting responses. And then connected to that was extra credit. I literally had like an extra credit pass that they can put on any assignments that they wanted to. And because of that, I started to see different parent engagement. Those kids talked about me so much that when during promotion, when I met the parents in person, they said they talked about your class all the time. And not only did they talk about my class, they had conversations with their parents about my class because I made it an extra credit fun assignment to go home and talk about math. And it was a question that I was hopefully that anybody could ask because I said it over and over again. And sometimes it had nothing to do with math. When my birthday was coming up, I said, my birthday is November 10th. Let you know when my birthday was. This was strategic because I was looking to get for them to get me something. You know what I'm saying? That was just the side note. So I started finding ways to engage with them. I started doing math in the classroom that was connected to videos, things that they can go home and teach their parent. Like I taught exponent rules and I gave them hand movements and I told them to go home and teach their parents. I did variables on both sides, solving equations. I did that to the cha-cha slide and I said, go home and cha-cha slide with your parent. What happened was when I said, this is something that I want to benefit my classroom and my students. Soon as I said that parent relationships is something that I need to be successful, all of a sudden, ideas to engage parents came to my mind. Again, it all started when I prioritized who was their success in my class.
One thing that comes to mind for me is a lot of time when we think about, or when teachers that I support think about involving parents, it is to curb discipline issues. So when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about if I'm building a relationship with the parents through this newsletter, through this partnership that we're building, it's preventative. So now it's not we're repairing something after it's broken, we're taking it to the mechanic because it has already broken down. We are doing preventative maintenance at this point. And I've seen some of your videos where the children are with their parents and they're doing the dance or they're doing the hand signals or whatever. I've seen that in your presentation. So I know that this is facts. This is not stories he's making up, people. These are facts. He has the evidence to prove it. And it's interesting because we hear Or we read parents complain on social media about this new math, and I wish y'all would send home an answer key because I don't know X, Y, and Z. But now you are engaging them through a newsletter where you're having them to talk about the mathematics or the things that are going on in class. You're providing them with the answer key so that the parent can ask the question, but also know how to determine whether or not their child is right. Like, you're setting them up for success. The parent feels like a partner, and the child knows how important it is for them to do well in your classroom, because me and my mom are about to talk about it when I get home.
Yep.
So it's so many wins from what you just shared. That is powerful. That is
And
so
to your
powerful.
point, when that child went home and told a half a truth about what happened in my classroom, because you know how they do, they leave the details out. Guess who had my back? Them parents. Guess who inquired, like, Mr. O'Neill, what is so and so leaving out of the story? Because I know how you move, and I know you not, because some parents really believe, because of their experience in school, they really believe that we're out to get their kid. And I'm just like, do you think if I could get kids to show up every day and do what I ask them to do in a safe space and not be a problem, like I would long for not to have any discipline problems. I would long not to email you. I would long not to tell that person stop talking while I'm talking, stop hitting that person, stop acting, asking them to go to the bathroom, and you know you ain't got to go to the bathroom. I would long for these things to happen. So to think that I'm showing up trying to get your kid is a waste of my time, right? And so literally to your point, parents were just like, you not gonna lie to me. Because I'm gonna say this, Lanisha, and I'm gonna shut up after this because it just strikes a nerve with me. You know your kid lie to you. Why you think they're not gonna come to school and lie to me? Like, and then lie on me. They lie. You know your kid. You know your kids, but because you're in mama bear mode or daddy bear mode, you got to protect the cub. Like, no, take that down. Know your child. And so when they start to realize, like, the person that I sent my child to school to be educated by cares and loves my child, now they're like, you just lied to me about who you text yesterday. Now tell me the truth. And when they heard the truth, they was like, I knew it, Mr. O'Neill. They had my back. So that is the importance of building parent relationships.
One major takeaway I'm letting resonate in my spirit from your response is we have to engage the parent. Like,
Yeah.
period. We have to engage. If we want our students to be on that pathway to mastery, we have to engage the parent, not just when something is going wrong, but when something's going right, or when nothing's going on at all. I'm just letting you know what's going on in class, what we're learning about. My birthday's coming up in case you want to get me something. I'm
Right.
just keeping the communication lines open so that you know that we're in a partnership with one another. Again, powerful. So
Right.
now we talked about that bond, that partnership that exists between the educator and the parent, and how that really allows us to usher those kids along towards mastery. What about the collaboration that needs to happen or should happen between colleagues, between teachers in promoting student mastery? What role does that play?
Yeah, this is something that I would say to your listeners, I was not an expert in. I engaged in it from time to time, and sometimes, honestly, our structures don't allow it to happen as much as possible. Even the fact that some of us in the same grade band don't have the same common planning time. But when I was blessed to have that, we did a part. I taught at an IB school, so there was an expectation for there to be some interdisciplinary actions between the ELA and the social studies or science and math. And there were some times that we did come together. What that ends up doing, it it literally allows kids to see that, the learning that's taking place is not siloed. It is connected. And it's funny because I remember in eighth grade when the sign, and I think now we could have done a better job with connecting those things, but they got into scientific notation in eighth grade. And when I taught it in math, they were like, oh, this is what we were doing in Miss What You Call It class. And I was just like, yeah, it is. And you do have a unit on this. And that's why this makes sense and how it can be transferable. I look at that now and see how powerful it could have been if we would have come together and built something out that like looks at math and science and how closely they are cousins or brothers or sisters in the scope of the work that they do or the discipline that they represent or the content, if you will. But I think it's super important because it allows the fluidity of what's happening at the school to come together. There was a huge project, and sometimes we centered it around like Black history, where we went from class to class and we had a theme, and they saw the math theme of the same thing, and then they read about it in another class, and then when in the science class they investigated it and looked at the science behind it, and then when they went to history class they look at the history. I remember that was a huge project that was amazing at our school, and it's something that can't probably happen all the time, but it should happen to show how interconnected disciplines are.
Ali was reading a chapter in this book called Affirming Diversity, and it was talking about how the teachers within this school had gotten together and created a unit together because there were some students from Cambodian backgrounds and they were marginalized. The school didn't know a lot about them. They were not as connected, I guess, as they could have been. So they got together and created this unit. And through the creation of this unit, they leveraged every single teacher in every single content area. And they found a way to weave in something about Cambodian culture. So the math class ended up creating uh, homes, 3D models of homes, the homes that are um, representative for their neighborhoods. And
Hmm.
then the other content areas did something that was related to their area, the history and things like that. And I thought it was so interesting that teachers were willing, because at this time they got together in the summertime, that they were willing to get together to plan this out. And it was a unit, but they also spread it throughout the year as well, so that it was something that constantly came back up, so that the students knew that they were valued in that community. So again, I only mention that because I think it takes everybody being kind of aligned and on one accord that we want to achieve this goal, with it being that cross-curricular collaboration taking place.
Yeah.
And then us stop having PLC meetings with just math or just ELA or just science or just social studies, and we're coming together to see how can we make better use of the things that we're talking about across all of these classrooms. And then that's going to just usher our students to mastery, because now they're seeing it over and over. I'm in a completely different classroom, but I'm seeing something that is related to what I was learning in my math class. So
Yeah.
so yeah, that just, it's weird that I read that today and you just gave me that wonderful example. So we have a lot of changes that we are experiencing right now in education. So given some of these diverse challenges that we are seeing within the educational landscape, how can teachers really balance standardized curriculum requirements with the need for individualized instruction?
You have really good questions, Lanisha. Definitely good questions. So I believe that the standards should take precedence. And though we have a curriculum, someone said this one day, and I wish I knew who said it, but they were just basically saying that the curriculum is oh, it just left my brain. What phrase did they say? Um, the curriculum is an artifact of someone's belief system. It's another word, another phrase will come to me. They'll hit me up. But anyway, I'll unpack that to make sense of it. So when people write curriculum, they are writing it from the lens that they view life, or they want to view life. It could be from their window, or it can be from peeping in to their life, or they may research and peeping in somebody else's life. They didn't necessarily have James Oneal from Belhaven, North Carolina in mind, unless the curriculum writers are from Belhaven. The curriculum was written specifically for our North Side High School, which usually doesn't happen, right? There is a white label curriculum, and sometimes you can take it in and you can make it your own, and sometimes you are restricted based upon what's given to you. Ultimately, our standards are what we teach, right? The curriculum just comes along to unpack it, to support them, to allow them to breathe out. But there are times that I believe teachers should have the autonomy to go in and say, my kids need this. Or the fact that my kids are never represented in the curriculum. And so the standard is being taught. I'm going to change where we are. I'm going to change the geography. I'm going to change the names that's inside. I'm going to change the actual setting of the place that we're going to, because it now appeals to the community that I support here in this classroom. And the math will still stay the same, but the representation of who's being seen and who's doing the math and who's making the decision, that may change. And so when I think about meeting the standard of the curriculum and then individualized instruction, not necessarily one-on-one for the student from time to time, but it can be based upon what you need to change for what your kids need for their class. And I remember we I was doing a unit on domain and range, and I share this in some of the professional development I choose when we're talking about culturally responsive. And I remember going to Nearpod, and I was a whole Nearpod fan a couple of years ago. I got Nearpod certified and everything. I thought I was doing something in Nearpod, but I was really was. I really loved Nearpod, and I built out this lesson, and I actually went on the library and I found a lesson on domain and range, and it was a really nice lesson. They had started just venturing out into the VR where things you can look in and you can move things. It was like 3D. And then a part of the lesson went to this section on this Aztec god of war, and they put him on a screen. Sorry, they put him on a coordinate plane, and you were asked to find the domain and the range of that Aztec god of war. And though it was cool to see other cultures, other belief systems being represented, I knew that that was an opportunity for me to find something that my kids would vibe with. And one of the things in that year, it was literally virtual teaching during the pandemic. My kids were so into anime. They and they got me into it. And I literally would come on, and be like, what y'all watching? Like right before we got on Zoom, and just be like, guess what I just watched? At the time, I was watching Attack on Titan. And during that time, I took the Aztec God of War off the coordinate plane, and I put Goku from Dragon Ball Z on the coordinate plane. And right then and there, I didn't change the math. I didn't change who defined the domain and range, but I did change the interest point of my kids. And when they saw Goku and I started talking about Dragon Ball Z is the greatest anime in the world, they went off on me. And the kids that hate anime were just like, why do y'all watch that crap? They're still interested. And the kids that love anime and either hate Dragon Ball Z or feel like there's more better anime out there, they started to go in on it. And what I did is that I decided to individualize the instruction for my kids. I took it out of the Now it's cool to learn about other cultures. I'm not talking anything about that. That just in that moment, I wanted to let them buy into something they were interested in, and the culture of my kids were huge in anime. And so when I think about like how can we, individualize instruction, know your kids, because you can't individualize anything when you don't know them. Ooh, Lanisha, I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna shut up right after this. I was in a classroom observing last week at a school, and I asked this teacher, who is not being asked to come back. I asked him, so what do you know about your kids? And you can tell it's somebody that pretty much has given up on their kids. He was just like, I know that they like to talk about robbing people and guns. And I said, so what else do you know about your kids? Oh, that's pretty much all I know. Well, first of all, you're telling a lot about your biases and everything right now. I don't have time. I'm only in here for a 15-minute reflection. You're sharing a lot, and because I know you're not coming back, I'm not even going to support this. But I let him know if that's all you know about your kids, then that's probably the problem. Why they won't engage. All you know about is they talk about robbing people, whatever. That's all you know about them. And so you talk to a teacher, again, mindset, trying to coach that teacher to find individualized instruction, finding ways to motivate the kids. That teacher has a clear mindset deficit about the kids that he's supporting in that classroom and should not be in front of kids in general. So when the principal said, I'm not asking that teacher to come back, I was like, and you shouldn't. And if I didn't know that beforehand, I would have recommended, because I'm putting it in my report, that this teacher, this is how he sees his kids. I'm gonna shut up because I'm getting all
Wow.
I'm getting all in my feelings again.
Mm, 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 mm. you about to put me in my feelings because I can about imagine a couple of things about that story. So, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, I really enjoyed talking to you. I want us to kind of zero in on how we can measure and sustain mastery. One of the things that gravitated me towards your company and you is not just your story, but just the name of the company. Like believing that mastery for all is possible, I think is courageous, right? It takes some guts to believe that, especially where we are right now in 2025. So I want us to think about how should teachers assess student mastery beyond traditional testing methods. So I ain't talking about just EOG or just EOCs. What are some other ways that we can think about assessing student mastery?
This is good because check for understanding seems to be missing in classrooms that are going now. And that's outside of before you get the test, before you are about to assess them summatively, what have you formatively done to assess them? And what I find is that teachers are just talking and they're just believing that their kids are soaking in everything that they say. Like, I wouldn't expect anybody to listen to this hour-long podcast and got everything that I said. Everything? You and I have been talking, and there has not been a space for me to be like, so what do you think? How do I know what you think? Right? Do you agree? Do you not agree? And so there's a couple of just practical things to do. One of the things that I think we have to continue to rebuild in teachers is presence and the call and response of what's in your classroom. Um, it became natural to me because I saw teachers do it. When you say class, what's the answer? There's an expectation that you hear something, and when you don't hear something, that's data saying they didn't get it or they're not confident. So after you build up your structure and your culture that they understand the call and response, like you've trained them that okay, on 5 4 3 2 1 your answer is what? Everybody says what their answer is. You don't hear anything. It's crickets. That's data. That means I now need to go in and diagnose what did they not get. Circulating around the room. I'm going to say some practical stuff that I don't see from time to time, Lanisha. Checking for understanding by when you give a warm up that you're actually walking around the room and seeing what kids are writing down so that you can diagnose what the main issues are. So when you ask them what the answer is, you kind of got a feel of where they're getting stuck. Just something that is just practical. Whiteboards, they are never outdated. When you ask kids, and you know, you say stuff like this, and then teachers will be like, I don't like using them because all the kids do is copy what they have on somebody else's whiteboard. That's data. That's literally telling you that they don't know and they're copying because they don't know, as opposed to just saying, all right, and this is how we do it. Any questions? All right, let's move on. Any questions? And nobody's talking to you, and that's your data point to move on. Stop it. I did it for years. Stop it. Stop it. And then you mad when you give that quiz and they don't know what they're talking about. You should have that data beforehand. Desmos, quizzes, a quick canvas if that's your learning management tool. You need data to assess where your kids are at, to have them turn and talk to the neighbor after you built that culture and then eavesdrop into the conversations, or the fact that they're not talking, which means that they don't understand after you built up a culture of expectation around talking. Like the lack of discourse is ways that for us to assess. We need data in order to speak to our classrooms, and those are just some simple ways that are outside of the traditional testing methods. And then our projects, I'll just add this. Like the projects that we put, when we can put together projects that really relates to students real world, and may not lean totally for what's going to be on the test, but just build up their their discourse and their ability to state their case and to stand on what they believe and to make sense of the mathematics. Like, that's the stuff that we want them to do, because sense making is what you're going to be always doing in life in order to just navigate life in general. I think those are all also unconventional ways to just really test what our students know and to build up the skill set of what they need to know.
So much, so many gems, so many gems. I'm not even going to add anything there. My final question for you is, what professional development opportunities do you feel are essential for teachers who are aiming to implement the Mastery for All philosophy effectively?
Quick plug, I have started doing some workshops. And so one of the workshops that I totally believe in is called Motivating and Supporting Hard to Reach Students. And it talks about 4 cultures that we need to build out for our students to have success. Many of our hard to reach students are hard to reach because they're literally sitting in a culture of a classroom that doesn't believe that they can be reached. And so I really hope to help teachers understand like the things that we should be doing within your skill set and your comfortableness, and then leading out of your comfort, like what our kids need, naming it, and then mapping it out. So ultimately that's going to lean back into mindset. There is no professional development that I do that I don't challenge people's mindsets. There is nothing. It is the core of which I believe mastery exists. And the other professional development really centers around understanding what it means to address unfinished instruction. It is true that our kids, unlike any other content subject, well, probably ELA when you think about reading levels and everything like that, but when you look at the ELA standards, is the text. As I've been taught by my friends, the text gets more complex. They have pretty much the same standards. That is not the case in mathematics, and so there are areas of unfinished instruction. So you need to be, like I talked about, the surgeon. How do you diagnose that? How do you build that? How do you build the scaffolds for that? That's another professional development that I think that teachers need in order to be mastery teachers. And then lastly, I think about the conceptual understanding of the mathematics. We know math in a way that many of us that is very procedural, but procedures are not going to get you on a test with words. You have to have conceptual understanding. So building that out and letting teachers learn why, the why of the mathematics is super important.
The James Oneal, I just appreciate you for joining me this evening. I know that the listeners are going to walk away with so many gems. And as you mentioned earlier, they set through 60 minutes. You might not have gotten everything on the first round. So guess what? Rewind that bad boy so you can get it again. Okay. On the night that we're recording this, I have just signed up for your upcoming session, and I can't wait to get in there so that we can talk about reaching those students who are difficult to reach. I hope I did not butcher that title, but I want you guys to make sure that you're on the lookout for what Mr. Oneal is doing so that you can get your butts in the seat for that session as well while he's still offering it. So my major takeaway for tonight is high expectations in math aren't just about what we believe students can do. They're about what we show them they can do. When we push beyond low-level tasks, when we encourage perseverance instead of quick answers, and when we refuse to let past struggles define future success, we create a learning environment where every student has the opportunity to thrive. It won't always be easy. Holding high expectation means providing strong support, scaffolding with purpose, and sometimes challenging our own biases about what students are capable of. But the payoff, students who see themselves as mathematicians, students who develop confidence in their thinking, and students who rise because we never let them settle. Thank you guys for joining me and the Mr. James Oneal. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a colleague, leave a review, or reach out. We'd love to hear from you and how you're unlocking your potential in your own classroom. I will include contact information for Mr. Oneal in the show notes, so please check there to get in connection with him. Until next time, keep raising the bar and making math happen.